Hello, crepes. You thought I was gonna forget to do the... No, I didn't forget, don't worry. Hello, hi, okay, so first let's just address the elephant in the room. Yes, I am wearing a Christmas Cthulhu shirt and in February, but that is simply because I could not find it in December and I was very heartbroken about it and I just found it, which kind of brings me into my next point, is that today I just wanted to share with you the horror thriller type books that I read this year, or this month. Last month in January. But I swear I live in a black hole. It's the strangest thing. I do not understand, but every time I'm actively looking for something, it's just gone. These books are just nowhere. They just disappear. They're just poof, gone. So I do not have them with me for whatever reason. But anyway, let's just talk about the books that I read in January. So the first book that I read, see now I have to get my list of books that I read because otherwise I don't know because I don't have the books. Okay, so the first book that I read was Fountain Society by Wes Craven. I'm not going to talk about this one too much because I made a whole video about it. I will leave it linked below in case you are interested to learn about that one in more detail, but it's definitely more of like a military type book. It's not a horror book at all. So some of these aren't horror. Most of them aren't, but that's okay. They all have elements of horror in them. So that one is definitely like a military book. It's about, what the military can get away with, and they're trying to do these experiments, and I don't want to give too much away, but it's definitely more of like an adventure type story. The next one that I read was called The Party by Robin Harding. This one I read because I've been really in the mood for thrillers lately. So I really wanted to read this book because I thought when I read the back, when I picked this one up, that it said a 16-year-old girl went missing on her birthday, on her 16th birthday. And so that's why I ended up reading the story. And then I got about halfway through and I was like, oh, that's not at all what happens. I wasn't disappointed, it was just not at all what I thought it would be. So it's about a family who invites children over for a child's 16th birthday, so a bunch of 16-year-olds, and they get a little crazy, and one of the girls ends up cutting her face. Her parents end up suing their parents. It's actually a pretty interesting story and dark in the sense of like a more realistic of things that probably do happen quite often, but definitely not a horror story by any means, not a thriller at all. Like the story is pretty straightforward, but it is kind of interesting to just see what the effects of something like that are on the children, the parents, and the entire town. But the thing that I liked most about it was how it was written. So it was written like 3 days before the party, the day of the party, a month. Oh, hi Marilla. Did you hide my books? I don't think she did. And then it was written like 30 days after the party or 20 days after the party, but it went through everybody's different perspectives. So you got the perspective of the girl who had the party, you got the perspective of each of her parents, of the parent of the girl that got hurt. It was interesting. It was definitely something that probably had I not thought that the book was about a child being abducted, I probably wouldn't have picked it up so soon. And I did enjoy it. I thought it was fun. A light, easy read. It's not a thriller, it's not a horror. Things don't go horribly wrong. It's not one thing after the other. It just really does center around kind of the night of that girl's birthday party and what happens to her friends. The next one that I read was called The Last Days of Jack Sparks by Jason Arnott. This one was really interesting. So it's about a man who's on a mission to prove that the paranormal is fake. And so he goes to this exorcism and he like laughs throughout the exorcism and he's just making fun of it because he thinks that it's all set up and that the actors are fake. And the exorcism itself isn't scary because you're kind of watching him ruin it. It's not like how I feel like a normal exorcism would be portrayed in a book. It's a lighter take on an exorcism. He finds a video on his YouTube channel that he didn't upload and it's very creepy and he wants to get to the bottom of it because it looks as if there is a ghost in it. He meets a group of people in Los Angeles who are trying to perform this experiment where they're trying to make a ghost appear by imagining a ghost, and they call it the Mimi experiment. That kind of goes back around into looping with the possession. And I don't want to give too much away, but everything kind of comes full circle and it's written very, very well. I will say that, like extremely well written. Every single piece ties back in, so you do have to like very much so pay attention while you're reading it. Another thing that I really loved was the unreliable narrator. So you have this narrator who's Jack Sparks, who's this like famous writer and he thinks he's so cool, and he'll say something, This isn't exactly what's in the story, but it's just going to give you an idea because I don't have the physical book with me, which again, I wish I did because there were some really good quotes in there that I wish I could put in. So besides like the really punchy lines, like there were some good one-liners in there. I highlighted more in that book than I have in most books that I've read the past, I don't know, year. So that I really loved. But the unreliable narrator, man, so he'll say something like, she just didn't talk to me because she was so embarrassed that I was so famous. And then you would get the perspective of the woman, and the woman would be like, he's a asshole, I just didn't like him. So you get this like very interesting dynamic between what he thinks of himself versus what everybody else thinks of him. And it reminded me a little bit of the Night Stalker docuseries on Netflix, because there's one point in that series where you hear Richard Ramirez say, oh yeah, I just stuck my tongue out at all of them and laughed at them when they were surrounding the cop car once he was arrested. And then you see footage and he's like cowering in fear from these people. It was that. It was just such an interesting observation on how people see themselves versus how other people see them. And so that I thought was so fantastic, and you have to be a good writer, I think, in my opinion, to be able to pull something like that off. So I think the book was very, very well written. I will say I didn't really love the whole Mimi experiment in there. It did connect back in, like I said, with the exorcism, but it just wasn't creepy. And although the exorcism in the beginning wasn't creepy, there were a lot of creepy things throughout the book that did keep me engaged and entertained. But the Mimi experiment just wasn't one of them. It was like this floating head that appears, and to me, I just couldn't get in the mindset of that being creepy. Now, that being said, this is based on a real experiment, and the name of the book is in the back of the book. He references it, so you can read about this real experiment that did take place. And I think if maybe I was a little bit more knowledgeable on the subject, it would have maybe affected me a little bit different, but I wasn't quite engaged as much as I was in the bulk of the story as I was in the Mimi experiment. So I would say I loved the beginning, I loved the end, but then sometimes in the middle, the Mimi experiment kind of didn't freak me out or anything. I don't know. That's just my personal take on it, although I do think it was extremely well written. I think that Jason Arnott is a very talented writer. Another thing about the Jack Sparks book is that it gives you a website at the back of the book, and it is a usable website, so you can go on it, and it's the whole thing is written like Jack Sparks died making this book. And so you get kind of like the intro from his brother and the outro from his brother, and then the middle section from Jack Sparks. And so you can go on this website and see people like leaving comments for Jack Sparks or commenting on certain things. And it's very interesting. It's very fun. It's kind of like a Blair Witch Project where they try to make you think that it's real even though it's not, kind of thing. And so that I really enjoyed too. So the fourth book that I read this month, I think, was my absolute favorite. This is called Bones, and it's by Jan Burke. And this book I really, really, really loved. This is exactly what I wanted right now. It's not so much a mystery, and I guess it's not a crazy thriller either, but it's about this woman who's a reporter, and there are a few murders in her town, and she becomes friendly with one of the young daughters of a woman who was murdered. She really wants to be able to solve the mystery of what happened to this woman because of the daughter, and she feels very affected by it. So they end up catching the man who killed the woman, but her body is still missing. Well, the killer, whose name is Nick Parrish, tells them that in order for him to not receive the death penalty, that he will bring them to the body. So that is what the first half of the book is. He brings them to the body and everything goes to hell pretty much. I'm not going to give away what happens, but obviously things don't go as planned. Now, I thought that this was going to be kind of like a ripoff of Silence of the Lambs, because the killer is very articulate when he speaks, or so he thinks, and he calls people his moths. And it wasn't at all. In fact, the whole story is kind of written around the killer of Nick Parrish, but not so much about him himself. Like, he's definitely in the beginning and the end of the story, but the bulk of the middle isn't really necessarily about him, and it's not really a mystery of figuring out what he did, but it's really just the story about this woman who is trapped in the mountains with Nick Parrish, and how she's, coping with life, and how she knows he's still out there. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was extremely well written. Some of the dialogue wasn't my favorite. I felt that it wasn't extremely natural in a lot of cases, but it didn't hinder the book for me at all. In fact, I really enjoyed this, and this was my favorite book that I read this year so far, last month, January. This was $2 at my local bookstore. If you guys ever see this, pick it up. I really enjoyed it. Okay, now the next book that I wanted to talk about was this one. This is the last book that I read in January. This is called Monsters in Our Midst, and this is edited by Robert Bloch, the writer of Psycho. This is 17 short stories by various writers, a lot of them very well known. We have Ray Bradbury, Richard Matheson, and the stories range from a man going and volunteering in the Peace Corps to teach in other countries to serial killers. It's a huge wide range of stories, and I really enjoyed this as well. This was $6 at my local bookstore, so if you guys, and it's all obviously an older book, so if you guys have the chance to pick this up, highly suggest it. I mean, some of the stories are very laid back about a woman calling and leaving messages for her answering machine to kind of cope with the things that she's dealing with, and then, like I said, all the way to a murderous family, and you know, there's just so much array of things in here, so not every story is scary. There's not necessarily a tie-in theme through all of them, but I think Monsters in Our Midst is a good name because the ones that I can remember off the top of my head, the monsters have been the narrators. Oh, maybe that's the link. Light bulb! Yeah, I would have to kind of go through each story, but I think that that might be the missing link that I hadn't caught on to before because I'm an idiot. But yeah, I think they're all mostly about the main characters being the villain themselves. So some really interesting stories in here. I've very much so enjoyed this, and this was the last book that I read this year. So I would say that these two are probably more of the horror-based books. This one probably more so thriller, although I will say that there is some graphic horror details in here. This one, everything from like very light to, you know, pretty dark material. The Party is not a scary book at all. That's just kind of like a, I don't know, maybe like a coming of age family drama type story. Fountain Society, definitely not horror, although I don't know what category that would be in. And then The Last Days of Jack Sparks is definitely a horror book as well. So those are the books that I read in January. I went very heavy on the horror this year, and I'm going to see you again on Sunday with another horror video since I missed a few videos in the past few days. And then I will see you Friday again for an interesting video on my second channel. Second channel, Instagram, and my short stories are all linked down below as always. I will see you again on Sunday with another horror video. Bye guys.